And again, the second half of our show. Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
Around that this is Britain's revenge for the Boston Tea Party. 3,000 screaming teenagers are at New York's Kennedy Airport to greet, you guessed it, the Beatles. This rock and roll group has taken over as the kingpins of musical appreciation among the younger element. Some music critics call their harmony unmistakably diatonic. Others say it's pandiatomic. Parents say it's just plain pandemonium. Their first meeting with the American press brings forth an interview laced with quips and humor. You'd laugh, too, with a gross of $17 million last year. New York City cops are hard-pressed protecting the Beatles at their hotel. On every side, there is hero worship that recalls the heydays of Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra. With one Beatle bedded with a sore throat, three of the quartet take an airing in Central Park. There was absolutely no truth to the rumor that the zoo's laughing hyena was driven underground.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the season premiere of Elder Millennials Behind the Counter. We are officially in season 3, by the way. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Rob Fishbeck, by the way. To my left or right, depending upon how you're looking at things, is Della Common, my co-host. What's going on, buddy?
Nothing. Those are some of the worst news jokes I've ever heard. It's like, not since the Boston Tea Party. Suck it, Paul Revere. Like, that
is a real news clip that I pulled. That is straight up.
Yeah.
Legitimate, like, New York news from 1964. By the way, gonna try to contain my excitement tonight. I'm a little scatterbrained right now. I was literally born to do this episode. If you can see behind me, I don't know how well the camera can show it. Above my thumb is the Beatles 65 Elements and American Release, Capitol Records, and then the 2 VHS tapes, A Hard Day's Night and Help, that I got for Christmas in kindergarten. Most people don't get into the Beatles till they're in high school. And then over here, I've got Meet the Beatles on vinyl, which is the American version of With the Beatles that I have here on CD. We'll talk about these records in a little bit. This is our main conversation for tonight. Yes, I have the DVD box set. So, to quote Paul, it was 60 years ago today, not 20 years ago today, 60 years ago today, February 7th, 1964, the Beatles landed at JFK Airport. They were awaiting a very large crowd. I've got some stat sheets that I'm going to pull up here momentarily. Huge crowd. Huge. And it's hard to say that and not sound like a certain somebody in 2024. Huge crowds. Okay. George Harrison has strep throat, so he can't even make it to the rehearsals that are on Saturday the 8th. And then February 9th, 1964 is a date that is literally branded into my brain. When I hang out with baby boomers and I start talking about February 9th, 1964, I don't have to explain anything. They all know what I'm talking about. Let's pull up some fact sheets real quick.
Before you do that, Rob,
go ahead.
Before you do that, I'm going to interrupt this filibuster to say welcome to the show to everybody who is watching. I have if you've followed our show, that you know that I have a healthy respect for the Beatles. They're not my favorite. There is another band that we talk about that I think is better, and not that debate. And we've gone through it. I mean, hell, like the last time we talked about it, we did a Beatles / Rolling Stones whole episode, and we got into it on that. But what I will say is, you have very much, I will say, over in the RFN Discord, Rob, like, not even probably a week or two ago, was like, oh my God, this anniversary is coming up. we got to do something. We got to do something. And I was like, okay, well, we can jump on it. Like, we do have a music show. We could do this. We have it within our capacity. Ever since then, he has been. So back in the day, SNL used to have a sketch with Mike Myers where he was very hyperactive and he was in a harness and they would tempt him with candy.
Yeah.
And he would have that candy and he would break free and sometimes grab this monkey bar jungle gym and drag it with him. This is only how I can compare your energy and excitement level is to that. You are a hyperactive child with no Adderall, no Ritalin, no nothing, just pure chaos right now. So I just wanted everybody to set the table before we get into the nerd stats and the sheets and everything like that. Welcome in third season.
Dude, hell yeah. Cheers, man. Season 3.
Yeah. Season 3. And we got a lot of great stuff that we're planning on doing in the future. Like we may even have an episode next week. 2 weeks in a row. What?
2 weeks in a row. Yeah.
The Beatles. I even had a conversation with my mother today, where one of the news stories was like, "Oh, what happened 60 years ago today?" And I even had to question her, and I was like, "Do you know what it was?" And she kind of drew a blank on me, and I was like, "Come on, you should know this. Like, you were alive during this." So yes, the 60th anniversary. Okay, I just wanted to set the table, give a little breathing room before we went in there. Now, so tell us, so how many people were at the, so they arrived 60 years today.
6 years today.
So
they arrived. By the way, thank you very much for reeling me in. I know I can, listen, if you ever click on a video that has like Bruce Springsteen in the title or the Beatles or something, or like Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
Della Common's job, not only as co-host on the show, but his like bonus job is just to like wrangle Rob so I don't get too far off track because I'm going to rant.
Okay.
All that being said, yes, all of that very accurate. By the way, I want to shout out. So I'm going to get these stats here in a second. And I appreciate all of you joining us tonight. I put this post on my Instagram and Facebook earlier, and I rarely go on Facebook, but I was like, I'm going to share this on Facebook. It's people should know, about today, this week, how important it is. And shout out to my uncle Tom Peak. He commented on it and he's like, I remember it like it was yesterday. And I'm just like, hell yeah. I was talking to my grandma about it the other day and she's like, I watched it live. Like we watched it live. Everybody watched the Ed Sullivan Show every week. And this show was no exception, but here's the stats. They landed at JFK February 7th. 5,000 plus fans greeted them. There's a difference in opinion. Some people say 3,000. Some people say 5,000. People say more than 5,000. So well, let's try to oversell it, I guess, a little bit. They had a press conference, very famous press conference. George was sick for rehearsals on February 8th. Studio 50, now known as the Ed Sullivan Theater. By the way, those of you that watched Stephen Colbert or watched David Letterman back in the day on CBS, that is the same theater that Elvis Presley made his 1957 debut in. The Beatles, that's where the Sullivan Show was. It was that studio, that stage, the whole thing. There were 728 seats in that theater, and they had over 50,000 ticket requests. And there was only 7,000 ticket requests when Elvis Presley made his 1957 debut. But what I will say, the caveat with that is, in the world we live in now, things don't change. Things in technology change very quickly. But like the rest of the world, it doesn't change this fast. But the difference between 1957 and 1964 in terms of music and pop culture then was literally, it may as well have been 3 centuries later. The first show was February 9th, 1964. They went on to play 2 that month or whatever at the Sullivan Theater, and over 73 million viewers. And the set list that night was All My Loving, Till There Was You, She Loves You, I Saw Her Standing There, and I Want to Hold Your Hand. All personal favorites of mine. All right, I'll pause for a second. I want to get, what are all of your thoughts on just kind of the info dump that I just had?
Pretty much as a lot of the stuff that I knew about going in. I think it's interesting. You also, like, as most people, especially if you are a music nerd, nothing is in a vacuum, really. So everything is a continuum. So I don't think you get, like you were talking about the numbers, and some people can say, hey, like, look at the numbers of Elvis, look at the numbers of this, and this is so much bigger, but they don't look at it as building. Without Elvis, and believe me, Andrew is in the chat calling me out as a Beatles hater. You think I hate the Beatles? Wait till you hear me about Elvis.
Not a big Elvis guy? We'll talk about that some other time. Not tonight. We don't have time tonight.
Not like the Beatles I respect. Elvis, I just no sir. Okay. No thank you. Not my bag. That's why whenever you were doing the Elvis doc or the Elvis movie, you were talking, you were like, I didn't want to touch that with like a 20-foot pole. So back on track. So everything is a continuum. So if you don't have, but I do, I am cognizant of the fact that without that Elvis appearance, you don't get the Beatles later on, 7 years later. Like everything has to have the momentum, and they're both touchstones on that sort of stuff. So that's my point on that. It is crazy to me, and we'll talk about this as we go through the show. One of the things that Ed Sullivan keeps bringing up time and time again is he goes, my favorite is he says, "Who's Pepperman?" He doesn't say Paperman or Papermen. Pepperman.
He had a very specific speech pattern. Yeah.
Yeah. So he also kept talking about the New York City cops, because there was just so much chaos going on compared to what you would have had on that normal broadcast. It's not surprising that 73 million viewers. I mean, this is back legit when there was, probably DuPont Network, CBS, NBC,
ABC.
And it probably was ABC even the ABC yet, or was it still? I thought they were DuPont
in 64. No, 64 ABC, I believe, was ABC. Yeah, you had CBS, NBC, ABC, your local affiliate station. The real question I would have for anybody that's watching the show that was alive during this time was PBS, was the public broadcasting station, a thing yet in 64? We know that was a thing by like the late 60s, early 70s, because that's where Sesame Street aired, which I believe debuted in 68. I might be wrong on that, but fact check me, everybody. I love to be fact checked.
I was going to say, I thought like PBS came around the Nixon administration, because it was one of the few like liberal things that happened.
Well,
because I could be wrong on that.
Nixon did win the presidency in 68, so I don't know.
So
anyway, yeah.
So on all of that is, so one of the things is fascinating between us is when we discuss this is because we are millennial and slightly younger with you. I'm actually the elder millennial, but you're within there. You're not Gen Z, but you are on the younger end.
No, I would never claim to be a part of that generation. No offense to Gen Zers, but I'm a boomer at heart, millennial by DNA.
Oh, you are definitely a boomer at heart. So what is interesting whenever we talk about stuff like that is we've got the rose-colored lenses of post-Beatles. We don't know a world that was pre this broadcast. So a lot of the stuff that we could talk about the anecdotes and go on and on and on about, we're only looking at it through kind of almost that postmodern lens of Christine. So it would be very interesting to get a perspective for somebody who was actually, I mean, outside of like most of my, talking to my parents, they're like, oh yeah, I remember watching it. I don't think they really had like, it was one of those cultural impact things, but I don't think it's something that like really stuck in their crawl. Like,
right.
But it'd be fascinating to talk to, because like, I mean, it kind of crept up even on me that it was 60 years. Like I keep thinking like I was only born 20 years after this, almost to the year, like, and I'm just like, wow. So yeah, that's just my thoughts on that info dump that you put on there. Like, it's crazy, like watching the clips and watching through, because for this episode, I actually went back through, and it's probably the first time I watched it all the way through. And I even watched the terrible, like, we could talk about the Ed Sullivan
We'll talk
show,
about that later, because I got a lot more to say before we get to all that.
Well, I'll let you go.
So for one, based on what you were saying, like, don't get me wrong, I would love to just sit down and interview people that watched it live. And I know a lot of those people. Those people are in my family, right? Because again, 73 million people watched it. You're bound to know a handful of them, right? But B, we do know the immediate impact, and we'll play some of those clips here. They'll be the next segment of the show. But I just kind of want to give everybody a little bit of historical context, right? And we've talked about some of these things on the show before, but since we're doing this specific show tonight, I think it's definitely worth rehashing some of them. So you have what's called the class of 55, which, don't get me wrong, next year we'll be celebrating some other things here on this channel. So you have, Alan Freed plays Bill Haley in the Comets, Rock Around the Clock, which it is not the first rock and roll song. Rock and roll music had already been in the black markets for a little bit, but contextually, you got to understand that the vast majority of people in America are white. So, at least, especially then. So the fact that, out of Cleveland, here comes Rock Around the Clock. That's the first time rock and roll music was played for white audiences. And that was huge. And then, same time, you've got Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, Roy Orbison, Elvis, Fats Domino, Little Richard,
Chuck Berry.
all these cats, right? And again, we've talked about this before, but come 59, you had, everybody knows the Don McLean song, American Pie. You have the Buddy Holly, Big Bopper, Richie Valens plane crash that goes down. Waylon Jennings was almost on that plane. Elvis joins the army. Chuck Berry goes to prison for driving a underage girl across state lines, right? Jerry Lee Lewis had been completely ostracized by America because he married his 13-year-old cousin. And even then, that was not acceptable. Even then.
Standards, America. Standards.
Exactly. So music, okay, so you had this initial rock and roll wave, right? And then, and Little Richard became a preacher and stopped, playing music for. So it's like everybody either died or went away for various reasons. So there was kind of this like little gap between like 60, 61, 62, 63. Now, here's what I'll say. For me, this is like the second era of rock and roll. And some of the greatest music of all time came out during that era. That is when Phil Spector rose to fame. Brill building music became a thing. Brill building music, the best examples I could give would be like The Locomotion that Carole King co-wrote. Okay. You had dance numbers, Chubby Checkers, The Twist that came out, I believe, in 60. Dee Dee Sharp's The Mashed Potato, I think that was 62. You had the rise of girl groups, specifically with the Wall of Sound, Phil Spector, Brill building stuff, like the Ronettes, the Shangri-Las, which is one of my favorite girl groups of all time, et cetera, et cetera. At this time, Berry Gordy is starting Motown Records, and Martha Reeves and the Vandellas are starting to come together, and we're getting inklings like right around this time, Diana Ross and Supremes and like the Four Tops, right? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, kind of the bridge of this, you're talking right now just in American stuff. And during that lull period is when England was catching up.
Yes.
On the back end. I knew that's exactly what you're doing, but okay. I wanted a context that you're talking about strictly American, like that post first wave. And then here comes the Brits with their influences from that first generation and even some beforehand.
So we'll get to that. So like, and then also, so, and anything you want to add it, but on top of this, you have like Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, and people like the idea of the teen idol is born, that famous like Dick Clark American Bandstand teen idol, clean cut, waspy looking white boys. That is what, Dion comes out, right? That is what is hitting the market. The Beach Boys first come out, and contextually, people got to understand the Beach Boys in the early days versus like when Pet Sounds hits and everything post Pet Sounds are two very different types of music. Yes, same with the Beatles, but the Beach Boys, they're singing, Surf and Safari and stuff at this time, right? So you kind of have this whole new era of music that's happening. Like Delacommon said, over in England, however, they don't have the same bullshit racial issues as much that we have here in the United States. So the kids over there, these little kids, are buying black records by blues artists. They're buying Robert Johnson, the complete recordings, and they're buying Son House and Little Walter and Howlin' Wolf. And those kids are Keith Richards and Mick Jagger and Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page and Steve Winwood and all of these guys. So, and we'll get to the four lads from Liverpool momentarily, but there was about to be this explosion in America because, again, and I still believe America is kind of like the hot spring of where things come from kind of in the world. So this all just kind of go ahead.
Which I would quibble with that only because I think between, especially like, I mean, there's pockets wherever, like there's scenes that pop up, whatever. But I think the main two, especially when it comes to popular music, especially in the 20th century, it was almost a trade-off between England.
Sure.
And that, so whenever America seems to be dying down, yeah, especially now. But I mean, this is really the start of, if you want to look at it, the dialogue between us and England when it comes to music. Like, it's really where it started. Okay, now you go. Now you go. Now I go. Now you go. Right. That's really, this is where this started off on, because, you know, before then you didn't really have, especially with English music, it was pretty much kind of stuck in the same folk, and also like, yeah. And also like the ballador type thing of like Sinatra and stuff, like the you're still in that swing jazz era that is coming from I mean, pretty much you had from the 30s all the way into the 50s, like a good 20-year run of like that sort of wave of stuff. So that's why I just wanted to, that it was definitely this is the beginning of the back and forth between America, you know, and being cross-pollinated.
Right. So again, all of this shit's going on. And by the way, if you clicked on this video and you want like a musical education, you've clicked on the right video. All of this is going on. Meanwhile, in Liverpool, out of Liverpool, now don't get me wrong, they cut their chops in Hamburg, Germany, and the Cavern Club. And listen, this isn't a whole Beatles saga. You can watch the Beatles anthology if you want that whole story. But their music has come over to the United States. Love Me Do was their first, you know, big hit here. And then like, obviously like She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand fucking just changed everything. So there is this is unprecedented, right? It's one thing for Elvis to play Ed Sullivan. He's from Tupelo, Mississippi. But this is unprecedented that this band that, you know, writes their own songs and plays their own instruments are going to come over here and they're going to do this show live on television. So it's a big deal. And I'm going to play a clip right now and then we're going to talk about it. Little bit of what's going on. I've got 3 clips to play. We'll kind of talk about them one by one. And by the way, if you're here in the chat, anything you want to bring up, go ahead and bring it up. So this is the first one that I'm going to play.
The Beatles were like a gift from God. I was just at the perfect age for that. 14. Gave us all an identity. And I've thought before, just for the music, it was such a bonus that the music was like the best music ever.
I was Beatles all the way, man. I was my bedroom wall was in fact completely covered. The walls, ceilings, doors, any Beatle pictures were stuck on my wall. And I used to have these fantasies of Paul McCartney marrying my sister and all this kind of crazy stuff, you know, and how wonderful it all was.
I mean, so some of these clips, I did them on purpose because it's like, of course, if you know Tom Petty, huge Beatles fan. But I just thought it was like, I know this and I understand this. I know you know this as well. But to think Ozzy Osbourne, this little kid got all these Beatles posters in his room. It's wild, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you also think about it, like, Joe Strummer was like a massive Elvis fan, and you never associate him with anything Elvis related. And, but I mean, even his band previously, before, I don't want to go on a tangent about Joe Strummer, because that one this is where I would be like, okay, let me sit you down. Come over
Love
here.
Joe Strummer.
Let me tell you all about Joe Strummer. But yeah, there's a lot of, especially with those bands, we have to think within their age group that, of course they were Beatles fans. Of course they were Elvis fans. Like, even, your most gnarliest guy, except for Ozzy Osbourne, looked like he was a dad taking his kids to Disneyland in 1994 in that clip. But
I love the Batman hat. And it's from the 89 Batman movie that's where he got that hat. Here's another clip I want to play. We'll go through these clips real quick and just kind of discuss them.
So February 9th, 1964, our whole generation had the epiphany of seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. They introduced a whole new world to us that didn't exist before, the world of a band as opposed to solo performers, which communicated something completely different. It wasn't, look at me, I'm in the spotlight. It was about us. It was about the family, friendship, ultimately a communicated community.
Is it true that when you saw the Beatles, it was like seeing friends? You felt they were regular people?
Yeah, they were my idols, and they did it.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you something, I think you'll understand.
They wrote their own music, they wrote their own arrangements, they played their own music, they sang their own music. It wasn't synthetic, it wasn't, put together for Hollywood. It was their own work that did it.
That's what you needed, that confidence and that example, I guess.
Yeah, they were my idols. The Beatles didn't look like the Hollywood stars. The Beatles looked like working class guys. They had an attitude. I guess being from Liverpool, that's a working class town. And when we saw these guys on TV, we said, wait a minute, they don't look like Fabian. They don't look like Frankie Avalon. They don't look like Elvis. They looked like regular guys, like people you would have hung out with, except their hair was longer. And I picked up on that right away. I said, so that's possible. I could actually do that coming from where I come from.
Steve Van Zandt, I think, is just my favorite human, in the entire planet. By the way, most dangerous.
Put the dog down. Put the dog down. You're being interviewed. You're giving thoughtful, well-articulated points about the Beatles and their importance. Put the damn dog down. I'm sorry. I love him too, and I love his insights. He's one of my favorite people to listen to. He's got some of the best quotes when it comes to rock and roll, but sometimes he's just so damn ridiculous. But that's the whole time the clip was playing. I'm like, Steve, the dog wants to be put down. Put it down. Okay. So sorry, I had the tangent on that point.
No, it's all good. I mean, he wrote the foreword to my favorite book, Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Albums of All Time. Listen, I go on about Steve Van Zandt for the next 5 days straight. I want to play one last clip and then we'll just kind of have this discussion.
Hey, I went to New York with the boys, and you would see men middle-aged men walking down Fifth Avenue with beetle wigs on their heads. And no matter where you turned your dial on your radio, at any time of the day, you would hear a Beatles song. It was complete saturation.
The Beatles are coming. They got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so finally we got to the point where they landed at the airport in New York, and there was like 50,000 people there. It was unbelievable.
I said, this is it. It's all over, but the shouting. We had never seen an airport that you couldn't get to because of kids standing out there screaming. We'd never seen kids fainting like that at concerts. We never heard screams like that you couldn't even hear the music while the guys and you knew they were playing.
I mean, this appealed to me in a very fundamental way. I think I was about 13 or 14, and these girls were going nuts.
I was pregnant with Kenya, my daughter, when the Beatles thing swept, okay? And I remember I Want to Hold Your Hand, and I'd be in the kitchen just sweeping and cooking and taking care of the babies and singing I Want to Hold Your Hand.
The keeper was 1964, I Want to Hold Your Hand, on South Street with my mother driving. I immediately demanded she let me out. I ran to the bowling alley, ran down a long neon lit aisle, down the bowling alley, into the bowling alley, ran to the phone booth, got in the phone booth, immediately called my girl and said, have you heard this band called the Beatles? And after that, it was nothing but rock and roll and guitars.
Yeah.
So first thing.
Yeah, go. Yeah, please go ahead.
First thing,
Yeah.
real quick. Bruce, no dog. See, Steven, follow the leader of your band. No dog. No. So what I was about ready to say before we went on to this clip, and then we can comment about this. One thing that Billy Joel brought up that I never really thought about and put it in the context of what is my wheelhouse with punk music is one of the things that is the driving force of punk music is the DIY, do it yourself, seeing regular guys. So that was interesting to hear that because I haven't heard that clip before about how Billy Joel was saying, "Hey, these look like just regular Joes," and I was like, "Yeah, they don't look like none of them, even like George and John, who are probably the most aesthetically pleasing out of the bunch,
right?
Like traditionally, I'm not making a
Right.
judgment call either way. I'm just saying, but traditionally, even then, they're still just regular dudes." Which I really hadn't really put that together where how like that could really warp somebody. You know, they're used to seeing these Elvises and they said Frankie Avalon and like this sort of like almost just too handsome rock star or pop star. And then you have these guys who come in and they do have the way they dress, the way they are just straight up not punk, but it has that same appeal as punk. Hey, you could do it ourselves. Wow, what the hell? These are just working class guys.
Well, three things from what you just said. One, you got to remember, like Brian Epstein and, they weren't dumb. So if you look at kind of the Beatles, like earlier on, they're in jeans and leather jackets, right? And it's that era as well. I mean, this is still that era, but whatever. But the fact that they're in suits, and I mean, when they hired Ringo had a beard, because he's a little older than them. And they made him shave it because they wanted this kind of clean cut look because, this has kind of been said, and I personally feel this way as well. Like, that's going to help them win the hearts of more people, right? So that's A. B, shit, I forgot what the rest of my points were. One of them was, yeah. So remember when I was talking about like the idea of the teen idol? That's what Billy Joel was talking about. Like these people that like look like Ken dolls, more or less. And then my third point was the Beatles come and they set the stage. And then just a few months later, your favorite band of all time shows up and they're
lights everything on fire.
Homely looking.
Yeah. But, well, that's the one thing that like, and not once again, we keep getting ourselves dragged into this just because the Rolling Stones and the Beatles are so big in our orbit.
And they're so great.
And so, but like, you have these clean cut guys that are on here, and then you have the Rolling Stones, which were dangerous looking. Dangerous. They were seedy. They were like, they ooze sexuality where there's not an inch of sexuality. And like, especially when we go through the what is going on during this Ed Sullivan thing. You and I discussed this beforehand, and you also know I'm personally not a fan of the Beatles until Revolver. Once Revolver happens, that's when the Beatles got interesting to me, and then that's where you have me on board. This version of the Beatles, while I appreciate the music and the craftsmanship, no interest. And the reason why is because there's not an element of it's so, and this is also by our standards now, it is so clean cut, it is so marketable, it's so, I mean, the fact that like you had, especially when the American market, just think that we don't have the saturation of media. We have a concentrated media back then because you had such limited avenues. But it was still like for somebody like a band like the Beatles to cut through that early to where you have this reaction when they just arrive. You have to like have that marketed down. And I'm not saying it's contrived. I'm just saying, well, it is contrived, but I don't mean it in a cynical way. You know, they are clean cut. They are like in suits. They are whatever, and they're perfect for the Ed Sullivan Show. That is what we're discussing about is because this Ed Sullivan Show, like it's a it's almost like the old school vaudeville variety shows that they used to have back in the day. And so to fit that format, you can't just
and they're charming and they're funny.
Like you're not going to get the Stones getting there before the Beatles at absolutely whatsoever.
No.
So
no, I mean, again, and it's like even I don't have any clips of it, but like if you go look on YouTube and like look up their press conferences from when they landed at JFK or just like around that time in general, like long before 2 years before the whole "we're bigger than Jesus" quote, but which I understand what John was trying to say with that 100%, but whatever. They're very marketable. They have this very endearing quality. And I don't know if I could say that about the rest of all of the bands from the 60s. I don't know if I could say that. And I don't know if I could say that about most of the bands from the 70s. So they're this wholesome thing. So that being said, I did want to say this point. Since we're on the topic, I'll just say this now. I've given this a lot of thought over the years. I've been a Beatles fan since kindergarten. So big Beatles fan since kindergarten. It comes down to two things for me. So for those of you that don't know me, there's like 3 periods of the Beatles. There's the beginning years up through Help. And then there's like the middle years, Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour. And then like there's like the later years, White Album, Abbey Road, Let It Be, that have and those 3 records specifically have more of like a roots rock sound to it for sure, especially White Album and Abbey Road and parts of Let It Be, the unspill Phil Spector version. That being said, my favorite period of the Beatles is the early Beatles. It's everything up through Help. And I've got this figured out one of 2 reasons or both. One is that's the music that I listened to first. So kindergarten, first grade, second grade, we literally like in my car, my mom's Jeep or my dad's at the time he had a Mitsubishi car or whatever. And I think he got a Jeep too. It was with the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night, Help. And then later I got the Please Please Me album and Beatles for Sale. Those were the albums that we were just listening to constantly. So there is that. The other reason I think that I love this period the best, even though like the songwriting's not, I mean, shit, their first 2 albums, half of them are cover songs of Motown stuff, Chuck Berry, right?
Which is the standard operating procedure.
Right. The Stones did the same thing. Their first couple albums, Chuck Berry covers and
I share with you that one bizarrely, it's so good and it shouldn't be, but the Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons doing a cover of Queen Jane approximately. Like it's just mind blowing because that's all that I mean, that was just the standard thing of the way it happened.
That's like the opposite. Because it's like this like kind of like you got Dylan and then here's like this more clean cut band doing a cover of it. But anyway, so I say all this to say, for me, I think the other reason that I love this period the best, and the cover songs too, me and my sisters talk about this all the time. We like their version of You Really Got a Hold on Me better than the Motown version. And it's nothing personal. When they sing Anna on that first album, with John's, it's incredible. Baby, It's You. I say all this to say, I love the periods of rock and roll and pop music before the Beatles hit. And I love all music post 64, post British, after they hit, up through the mid to late 80s. But to me, those first 4 Beatles records bridge the gap of where we were and where we're going.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with you on that.
Because you're getting these covers of Money, That's What I Want, and You Really Got a Hold on Me, juxtaposed to Harrison's first track, Don't Bother Me, juxtaposed to Lennon and McCartney writing a song like I Want to Hold Your Hand. And this isn't a songwriting course, but they took what Roy Orbison was doing with like, hey, we don't have to do this verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, out, like song's over. I can chop this up and dice it however I want. And Lennon and McCartney like saw that from like Roy Orbison and those cats and was like, hey, so if you look at the song structure of some of these songs, it's like, oh, they go back to the B section. They go back to the bridge that, and when I touch you, I feel happy part. It's this A-B, so it's song structure, very interesting. So it's kind of, it's bridging the gap. And then where we go, it all boils down to after the Sullivan Show, when they meet Dylan and Dylan's like, yeah, your stuff's fine, basically, and then that
Dylan
infuriates John.
Yeah, I was going to say that I would have been Dylan in this, like, take a drag of a cigarette. Yeah, you're all right. You're fine. You're nothing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's one thing. The one thing that I can't remember who talked about this specifically, and I wish I did. One of the things that made me appreciate the Beatles, especially when, I was so more deep into the Rolling Stones, and also like I said, Revolver, Rubber Soul, I could get behind, but really Revolver On is where I'm dialed in when it comes to the Beatles. They not only opened the door, they showed what was possible to a lot of bands. And then once again, you can also say that about the Rolling Stones too. But once again, we can keep going back and forth on that.
100%. So 64 hits, the British invasion begins. And once that barn door has opened, it never closes. And to your point, in the 90s, Oasis is hitting in the States. And in the 2000s, like, whether you like them or not, Coldplay becomes really big. Like the idea of like the exported music from England. Once the Beatles hit, everyone's closely paying attention to what's coming out of Europe in general, because it's not just England. I mean, other countries as well had, Ireland's got U2, but that's not till way later. But yeah. So, and then also, this is the other thing I wanted to say. The reason I played those clips, not just because I enjoy watching all of those people talk, but like George Martin was onto something. You had middle-aged men and like guys in their 30s and 40s that are running around in Beatles wigs. Like it wasn't just, it wasn't just like, I'm not saying the Taylor Swift market is just women, but it's definitely a big market for women with Taylor Swift music. But like, you would think that, okay, cool guys that are into art are going to like music and chicks are going to like music, right? But this transcended even just the baby boomer generation. Like everybody liked the Beatles.
Yeah.
Your parents, the same people, obviously they're older, different generation, but like those same parents that thought Elvis Presley was the devil music are cranking I Want to Hold Your Hand. Kind of, sort of, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably certain sections that are like that, but I mean, for like, especially if we want to look at it, my grandparents' generation, I remember my mom distinctly talking about, and especially my mother or my grandmother on my dad's side loved Elvis. Like they were that generation where it's pipe in, and just say that generation starts having kids 7 years later. You've got little kids going around, would be my mom's age. Because my mom was born in 59, so she would have been, 5 when this came out, so you have that gap. So you, once again, when you're talking about the building, you had the I don't want to call them generations because these are almost like within the sub-generations.
Sure. Yeah.
So you
They're
have
all
like baby boomers
but-
that,
yeah.
the pre-boomers that, that had, were accepting of Elvis, and then you jumped into those who appreciated. So yeah. Trying to think. So let's talk about the actual show. Are we good on the clips and stuff, and talk about the actual show? And
I
then
think
kind
we've
of the
covered
song
everything
choices.
else.
And so, as like we talked about before, this is the first time I think I've probably sat and watched through a majority of it. And I went to internetarchive.org to just my stuff. Rob has we found essentially we probably have the same thing. Like he's got the DVD set. I'm pretty sure we watched the exact same thing. Because it's the full show. From start to finish, ads and all. I enjoyed the leather. There's this weird leather shoe shining thing. Like it's just very funny. The Ed Sullivan Show is very bizarre to think about in retrospect because we don't have anything like that. Like those variety shows died out in the 70s, and even when they had them in the 70s, they were. Yeah, I mean, it can be done well, but
it hasn't been
though. No, I think. Yeah, like that was the whole point of like David Letterman's Stupid Human Tricks was almost a playoff of those old variety show type of deals. Which did you know they're doing Stupid Pet
Sarah
Tricks with Sarah
Silverman.
Silverman? Yeah,
I like Sarah Silverman.
that's interesting.
So
I
I
like
won't
Sarah
watch the
Silverman as
show,
well.
but yeah.
But so what I laugh the most is so Ed Sullivan, they were incredibly smart. They didn't just pack the Beatles into one section; they broke them up into two. So the first, what is it? Is it broken up 2 and 3, or
So
is
it's broken up. So it's broken up into 2 sections. I'll pull the set list back up. So they played All My Loving, Till There Was You, She Loves You. And then, so they actually it was a pre-recorded segment with the magician because they had to change the set for the Beatles' second set. And then they came back and played I Saw Her Standing There and I Want to Hold Your Hand.
Yeah. So it was very interesting. Like I told you, like I said, and I'm glad that it's pre-recorded. And I know that now because I thought that how bad would that have to be that you have to go on stage and follow the Beatles. So that actually makes me feel a little bit better because when I watched it, I was like, who is this guy? Like if you watch through the whole show, it is bizarre just because you have this like massive, it's almost like 58-minute broadcast. There's only 2 minutes of like commercials back then.
Right.
And you only have 14 minutes of the Beatles. And that's including like his intro and his outro. And then like, them talking about it. Like, so, and this 50 something minutes, you have, to me, 14 minutes and a whole lot of filler. I mean, a whole lot of filler.
That's how you get that ad money, Delacommon. I mean, like,
but this
you
is back,
imagine,
this is back when, but you're talking about when ad money was like, I know. Yeah, I was gonna say like it
the
was
Don Draper era. Yeah.
Oh, madman.
But that being said, to your point, and Andrew brings us up about Frank Gorshin. I remember that. That's right. I mean, Batman didn't come out till 66, so he was just doing his normal routine. But that was the Ed Sullivan Show. It was a variety show, and it's like the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, totally different show. Like,
it's more akin to like Lawrence Welks, if speaking of PBS, if you're talking about like,
yes. I mean,
that was like the last remnants of it before it really officially died out. Like that type of
Dick Clark's American Bandstand, that was a music themed show. This was the definition of a variety show. You'll have magicians and comedians.
Comedian was on there.
And et cetera, et cetera. Music, right? So all that being said, I've recently rewatched last year. I rewatched all of their shows, which, by the way, so for those of you that don't know this, they've taken them all down off of YouTube. And I've told Delacommon this multiple times. If you're watching the show on the replay, go look on YouTube because I guarantee you by Friday, February 9th, all this shit gets re-uploaded onto YouTube because they're not dumb. But otherwise, we would just share the videos on YouTube with you guys. But we don't want to get in trouble, so it's a little difficult. But the show itself, contextually, 73 million people watching, and you had all of these. I've heard all these stories. I'm sure you have too, whether they're all true or not doesn't really matter. But you know, the idea that like the next day every music store was sold out of guitars because everybody started a band the next day. You know, and it's like it might not have actually been.
We joke about that with like the Velvet Underground, where not every person bought the record, but everybody who bought the record started their own band. Like yes and no. Like,
but like on paper, Tom Petty and Bruce Springsteen start their first bands in 1964. You know, Bob Dylan famously, who was already a recording artist. This happens, and then he goes and sees A Hard Day's Night in the theater. Shortly thereafter, leaves the theater, decides he wants to buy a Rickenbacker guitar because he wants to be like George Harrison. And that summer at the Newport Folk Festival, he comes out, he does his acoustic set, and then he comes out and does an electric set and gets booed off the stage. And that's the year Bringing It All Back Home comes out. And it's like Dylan went electric because of this, you know.
And still had the balls to tell them they're just okay. That's Dylan. That is Dylan. I completely reinvented how I did because of you. But when you're face to face, nah, I'm too cool. Like you're not. No, you're still down here. I'm still here. Fucking
I mean,
Dylan.
I think Bob was specifically talking about the lyrics. You know, I don't listen.
I know.
Cause you gotta figure Bob's thinking like, listen, yeah, there's some chicks at these folk shows, but the real chicks are at the Beatles shows. So there's like that aspect. And then just like, I mean, musically and melodically, Dylan, especially at that time, was not doing anything that interesting musically, but lyrically, he was already changing the game. But the Beatles musically, especially with those harmonies, I mean, like, I get chills. Like, dude, I'll sit and watch really bad video and audio quality videos of the Beatles in like 64, 65 all day with the screaming girls and just like, it's just, you know, it just infatuates me. But
and also it's really funny to watch us, like we were talking about with a post. We're used to the post Beatles world. So a lot of like the clips that they would like the cut tos that they would have of people in the crowd. And I'm like, I mean, I've loved bands. I love bands. You know, I love music. We do this show. You and I, 90% of our conversations are about music, like outside of like here. But I have never emotionally been wrapped up in the way that like these girls, and then there's guys in there too.
Sure.
That are it's really funny seeing them sprinkled out within the audience. Like, dude, you're the ultimate date night if you could pull Beatles tickets in you know, New York.
Scoring twice that night. Let's put it that way. Yeah, for sure.
So, but it's just very funny to watch this now because, like I said, we're looking at it through a post Beatles, postmodern lens of like what this means. But it is wild to see like the reaction of like, and also like, you also got to think that like this is a time period where these people were that emotionally invested in this band that had never been to America. Like we're used to social media where, you know, hey, somebody could, you know, hell, even recently, I'm like, hey, Australia's got a cool little scene going on. I'm finding bands that only have like 200 views on YouTube and stuff like that. And I'm used to this world now growing up to where we have access to this. But I've still never been that emotionally invested in something. And it's also how they got to it without the avenues that they're without being bombarded. You know, Walter Cronkite wasn't talking about the Beatles probably before 64 and them coming, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like, oh, well, hey, they're coming. The Beatles are coming. They're coming. Right. But it really was. The Beatles were coming. Like, it was a event, a hip, a happening type thing. And it's just wild to think about how just drastically different that world is compared to what we live in now.
Well, and you just I didn't even think about bringing this up. I mean, like, yes, I know it's there, but like, I didn't even think to bring this point up until you mentioned Walter Cronkite. You got to remember too, this is JFK was assassinated November 27th. I want to say end of November of 63. This is like barely 3 months later after like America is still an open wound mourning the loss of JFK.
Yeah.
You know, We live in this 24-hour news cycle where like crazy shit goes down, and then the next day, like crazier shit goes down. But I mean, this was the assassination of the president of the United States. You know, in 64, like obviously we are in the heart of the civil rights movement. Like there's just so many things that had happened already and are currently happening leading up to this whole British invasion. So, and again, America, it was just a totally different time. Like beyond the limitations of only like 4 or 5 channels, beyond the, that's the newsreel you're going to get. Beyond all that, like it was just a different time. Like there was just less options. There were no video games, et cetera, et cetera. So the fact that this drew 73 million people doesn't surprise me at all, but I don't think we'll ever have anything to this level ever again in music.
I mean, realistically, and I hate this comparison because, I'm not the biggest fan of their music, even though I actually respect them. Like, I don't have anything like personally, like I don't have this weird vitriolic opposed to them, but this is like, you have somebody who's like Taylor Swift, who is the absolute assassin when it comes to marketing, doing it subtly, doing it stuff like that. Like, I think she is the closest person that we have to that level. And I don't even know if this is an app comparison, because I don't think you really can, but I'm just saying nowadays where you have somebody who is probably more in the universal kind of realm of that sort of stuff. Like, I think it's, we don't live in a world that's like that anymore. We won't ever see that again, where, unless there was some type of weird collapse and we go back to only having 3 channels and stuff like that. So, like, once again, when we're talking about the show, it was very interesting to me watching this through, and also because I was a broadcasting major in college. So I looked at it through the lens of like what, we had going on during that time period when it comes to television broadcasts. So it was very fascinating to me, where this is like almost where you're at the stage where, I was actually shocked to see that there was multiple advertisements, because I'm used to, especially in this time period where, Colgate would do a comedy hour, would sponsor a comedy hour of Sid Caesar or something like that. So it was interesting to watch it on that. But so, yeah. So they broke it up into the 2 sections. So you had the 3, which is genius. And they also like save it for the end too. So we can, didn't they have something they had one closing thing after the Beatles, like they finished their last set, and it was just weird.
I believe so. So you've watched it more recently than I have, but I have the DVD so I can look. You talk though while I look. It was an acrobatic comedy, Wells in the 4 phase. That was after the Beatles. Again, if I could be so bold and be in charge, be the director of that show or producer of that show, I would have probably done the bulk of the show, had them come out, do 3 songs, cut to commercial, come back, and just end the they're the closer. You know what I mean? Because,
but I also don't know what the Ed Sullivan format was in other shows. So I don't know if they were just like, hey, like, yes, we have the Beatles. Yes, it's a big deal for us, but let's not change who we are for it. Which I never really thought about that. Like, it's probably also the format that SNL probably stole from, is, they have their musical act in the beginning, and they also have it towards the end of it. So,
right. It's always before Weekend Update at the 25-30 minute mark. And then, because they open the show, cold open, intro, host comes out, does this thing. They usually do 2 to 3 sketches, musical act, then Weekend Update, then another 2 sketches, then another musical act, and then another 2 sketches. So yeah, no, you're right.
Which
by
the way,
that out loud. Yeah.
I just now thought about that when we were talking about it. Also, one of my favorite Twitter accounts is hosts introducing bands from SNL. It's just the clip of them introducing. Yeah, there's a whole. I can't remember what the actual Twitter account is, but if you look at it, it's something like that, like SNL hosts introducing artists, and it's just, it's all it is clips of them saying that. So what So when can you pop up the set list back up here?
Yeah, you got it.
Of course, for somebody who's not like I'm really pretty ignorant when it comes to like this period of it. I mean, of course, I know She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand, and those are the two ones. I saw her standing there. I thought it was a little bit, if I remember correctly, that had a little bit of like an energy to it, if I can remember. Which there's one that's like where I saw flashes of what would be the later Beatles within their performing.
So
I can't remember which song it was.
How will we do this? I'll break down the tracks and then you can ask me any questions you want.
Yeah.
So starting with All My Loving, pull this down.
Yeah, I know that song.
I want to clarify this for the audience. I didn't learn this until I was like a teenager, and because the internet wasn't what it was yet. Once we get to Revolver, they're all the same. But pre-Revolver, you had, and then even after. So you had the British albums, and then you had the American albums. Now, I'll make this as brief as I can. The British records, though they would have singles on them, songs like She Loves You or I Want to Hold Your Hand, those were not on albums. Those were just released as 45s. Whereas in America, it was like, no, you got to put all the hits on the records. So I go with the British. That's my realm of thinking. And then like the Beatles 1 and Past Masters 1 and 2 would have all the singles on them anyways. We're not even going to get into anthology. So there's 12 or 13 if you count the Yellow Submarine soundtrack, which I do not, but that's a different discussion for a different day. There are 12 Beatles records, England. In America, I want to say, wait, I got the poster. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 American albums from 62 through 70. Capitol Records. I got the poster. I'm looking at it. So I say this to say, All My Loving is on Meet the Beatles, the American version, and it's on With the Beatles. And then you've got Till There Was You, which is a cover that was on With the Beatles. I'm assuming it was also on Meet the Beatles, which is behind me. I'm pretty sure it was. She Loves You, which was a single, but also assuming that would have been on Meet the Beatles. I should just pull the record off the wall. Doesn't matter. I saw her standing there. That's the opening track on Please Please Me, which is their first album. British album. And then I Want to Hold Your Hand, which again was just a monster hit.
Yeah, that was a good choice as your closing. And I enjoyed watching Ringo really, like, I forget how animated Ringo gets when he's really into it. But he was fully into it. So it was really interesting because I'm used to like bearded earring, sunglasses Ringo, and seeing him younger, kind of like just be goofy, was very endearing to me. But yeah, it was really cool retrospective, like watching this, because like I said, especially with this period of the Beatles, you are way more in tune to it. And it's one of those things where I watch where like I get it. It's still not my bag, but I get it. And also it was still neat to see kind of like, it's, I mean, this is an understatement and this is going to be a weird comparison, but so they, when hip hop artists talk about Rakim is a rapper where a lot of the stuff was like your, rap was very much still in the, I'm here to say da, 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 like it was still in that era. And then you have Rakim who came around, and they talked about one of the best description I ever had is where Rakim was the rock in the stream and you thought everything was going, and then it curves. The Beatles are not just a rock. They are, if a mountain dropped in front of like the ocean, like, like that was as big as what was gonna, like in a lake, or just like the monstrous impact of it. So it was neat to see that, because I know what everything came after. And I think a lot of people have, and I really encourage you, especially if you're like me, who haven't really, I mean, of the Ed Sullivan Show, you've seen the clips on stuff. It's really worth checking out, like all the whole set of the, it's only 14 minutes long. Right. We talked about actually almost doing a watch along, but we figured, because like Rob pointed out, like, all of a sudden a week ago, all these stuff were on there. And then all of a sudden this week, all these ones, YouTubes are just completely missing now.
Right.
And like you said, they're going to be up on Friday, and
More than likely.
Yeah.
And again, contextually, this is a retrospective show and we're celebrating and we're, all this sort of stuff. But again, it's like, you said it right, because I thought you were going to say a boulder. No, they were a fucking mountain being dropped into the stream because of them,
the landscape
the Rolling Stones, the Animals, the Kinks, Herman's Hermits, the Dave Clark 5, all of these
them.
Yeah, they're all possible now. Like they're all they can break through as well. So it's like, now that I think about it, like looking back, the Beatles didn't just bust through, kick down the door in America and the world just for them, but they kind of did it for everybody, not knowingly, if that makes any sense. Because, that same year, the Stones are, and I kind of feel like we should do a Stones piece, like companion with this, because they played Sullivan too, and that was a, huge deal. But when the Stones came to America, they're in Chicago hanging out at Chess Records with all those cats. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Andrew. The press wanted to keep John being married a secret. They said it on Ed Sullivan.
Yeah,
it said, John, sorry, girls, he's married. So it's not that much of a secret by the time they come in 64. Like it's clearly out in the open. They put it on the screen.
But that's what that's what I think. I think that's what Andrew's saying is like prior to that, the press was trying to keep it, or not the press. Rather, I'm sure what Andrew means is like Brian Epstein,
the company,
and like the record companies. Yeah.
That's still a weird thing that happens today where like celebrities or people will be hush hush, especially if you're a female or you're a female personality of any sort. Like the illusion of it. It's weird that still happens in 2024.
100%.
Like where you find out, like it's just weird.
But
people are weird.
Like again, contextually at the time, this religion, especially Catholicism, but Christianity in general, was far more prominent in everyday life in America. So just kind of the idea that you would be lusting after somebody that was married is a sin. So, and that's when that still meant something then. I don't
want to go on too much of a tangent on this, but I just always found that interesting that they
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I think by the time we get to like 67, 68, that's no longer like we need to put that up on the screen.
Yeah, like yeah. But I mean, it's still like I just found it funny when they put that on there. Like, and clearly marketing, they wanted to make sure that every single person knew who every single person was. Like, here's Paul, here's George, here's Ringo, here's John. Like the individual like medium shots. Once again, looking at broadcasting and directing and photographer's lens. Medium shot, close up almost. Name, title. We want you to know who this is. We want you to so you can have that. Who's your favorite? Oh, mine is George. Oh, mine is
my Aunt Karen. Shout out to my Aunt Karen Peak. She used to tell me stories when I was younger that like her and her friends would just go watch A Hard Day's Night in the theater like all day. They'd see the movie like 5 times in a row. And she goes, in between showings, the theater was just like a madhouse, and they would start cheering because like they couldn't wait for the next movie, and they'd be like, we love Paul, or something to that effect. And then like the next, we love George, and it's just like
sacrificed a goat right in between the showings. This is what this sounds like to me. This sounds like one of Lego's horror movies to me.
That's how like innocent things still were though in 64. Yeah. But like, so you bring up Lego, great talking point for me to bring up. So Lego, great friend of ours, co-host on this show, Characters of Culture. Lego, I don't think could name 10 Beatles songs, but she can name all four of the Beatles. People that I've met throughout my life, women, men, younger, like anybody under like my age or younger.
Well,
And
this
I've met
also
over
goes
the years.
into like our larger discussion. Especially, we haven't dragged Paul. I'm proud of us. We have gone almost
I don't
an
like
hour,
dragging
and we
Paul.
have.
You like dragging
I
Paul.
I like dragging Paul, but we're that also because that I mean yes I agree with your points, but also it goes back to our points that especially the baby boomer generation and Paul McCartney himself has made it a mission that you never forget that the fucking Beatles existed. Like
Right.
they will not let you. I'm actually surprised this isn't more of a big deal right now, because outside of like a newscast that I saw, I haven't heard anybody but us talking about
Well,
like the 60th
I'll get to
anniversary
that
of
in
it.
a second because I got some thoughts. But to wrap up the point that I was trying to make was people that I've met. Well, I won't say some of their names, but like I've known people that I know, gun to their head, they couldn't even name me 5 Beatles songs.
But if I was
like, can you name me the Beatles? Yeah. They'll go John, Paul, George, and Ringo. You know what? This takes them a second to get, but that's my point. You might not be able to name 5 Beatles songs, but you can name all 4 of the Beatles. So to your point, that marketing worked.
Yeah, it became ingrained into the not only like just the cultural of America, but also became like almost like whatever you would consider Western culture. The common language is so ingrained into it that like I say that to like we talk about the cynicism of what I consider Paul McCartney now, but this happened way before all this stuff on that.
People can name Yoko also, strangely enough. She's more famous.
Oh yeah, it's still a verb. It's almost a verb still. Like
don't Yoko us up.
Yoko-go'd. Yeah, like which Yoko didn't have anything like that. That ship was already sailed.
Well, but we didn't know this until Peter Jackson's Get Back Doc came out. So that being said, so here's why, to the point you just kind of brought up. So in 2014, they did, because Letterman was still hosting late night at the time. He didn't retire till summer of 15. They did a big 50th anniversary at the Ed Sullivan Theater. Like Paul was there and Ringo, and I think I want to say Joe Walsh was there. Like there was some cool cats,
Yeah.
And they did a couple of numbers. They're on YouTube. I think, well, that was the 50th anniversary, which is like a bigger milestone, I suppose. But I do think there's a couple things, and we don't know. Maybe they do have something planned that we just don't know about. I don't know of anything. But
I haven't heard anything.
They are 10 years older, Ringo and Paul. B, everybody that would care about watching something like that, a lot more of those people are dead now. Now, don't get me wrong. I still think the Beatles are very relevant. They just won a fucking Grammy for best music video the other day for apparently they put a music video out.
Let's not get started on the fucking Grammys.
But they're still they're still racking up points, basically, that's all I'm trying to say. But like in terms of like people that would actually care to like, oh, it's the 60th anniversary of the Beatles paying Ed Sullivan. I learned a long time ago, I'm like a fucking unicorn. I don't think there's a large market of people my age or younger, or even 5 to 10 years older, that would really care. Like, well, it's the 60th anniversary. We got to have some big show. Yeah, this is the big show,
Yeah. So, trying to think, do you have any more thoughts on like the actual show, like what was actually going on that? It was interesting. I haven't seen the colored version of it. I've only seen the black and white version. I noticed that because one of the things I did the intro that if you saw beforehand that we did there, and I looked at the clips, and like I'm always used to just seeing the black and white because how many American televisions were only black and white, especially that period of time. But also, but it's also interesting like to see like the color schemes and everything of the actual studio that was going on, like what the audience was seeing compared to what we were seeing on the screen. I thought that was interesting on that, just like on that note. And
I mean, like it was black and white. The world wasn't black and white, and then all of a sudden in 65 it turned to color. Because that's how I think about it.
The world didn't Wizard of Oz. Where it's just like one day, we're in Oz and everything is colorful.
Come on, Toto, let's go.
So, but yeah, it was very interesting to watch that from that perspective of stuff. You know, like I said, this is cool, and I'm glad that we decided that. I mean, you were giddy. I can't stress to you if you're watching this either live or watching it in retrospect. Rob's giddiness, like Rob texts me, like I already been through work. I've had a long day. I'm tired, and then Rob was like, "I don't even need coffee. I'm ready to go on this."
Dude, I put
And
on
I'm
a
glad
live,
that-
yeah, I put out a Beatles concert like an hour before showtime. It was like 27 minutes long, and I go, I was gonna make green tea. I don't need to make that shit. I'm good. Let's fucking go.
This is your cocaine. You're just up. You're
Straight,
just up
dude,
there.
straight up. Dopamine rush. Yeah.
All right. So, do you have any closing thoughts? Kind of everything on this before we wrap up.
Yeah.
This,
So closing thoughts are basically this. I mean, this was I make jokes about this all the time. Like all of my friends that I grew up with know like what the year 1964 means to me. Like not just with the Beatles, but like all music. We talked about the Newport Folk Festival. That was the year Goldfinger came out. Like Bond had already been a thing, but like Goldfinger took James Bond to the next level. Like they're just, like 64 is also, we're starting to see like the Hays Code in film starting to kind of dwindle, and within a few years we're going to have there's a lot happening. So like it means a lot to me, and specifically this event, it's historic. I think it's
it's a generational shift. It is it is like the one of the touchstones of a generational switch from, as we talked about, like the pre-Elvis to the Elvis era, and then this next generation that you're going to take you into the 60s generation. And this is like what is known as the 60s generation, because like most people in the 60s generation, quote unquote, if you look in pop culture, you're only looking at 64 on, or post Kennedy's death on.
Right.
So you're getting this huge cultural shift, and the Beatles were a massive and probably one of the most important benchmarks of that generational shift.
You couldn't have said it any better. And like when people our age or whatever, they think of the 60s, would know what they're thinking of is like 1967 through 1969. Like they think of the colors and the whole
hippies, Woodstock,
the drugs, the LSD,
Forrest
the
Gump.
Dead. Right. Whereas like for me, strangely enough, when I think of the 60s, my first thought is American Graffiti, which takes place in 1962. The hair, like that beehive haircut, and like the pastel colors. Like when I think of the 60s, like for those of you watching, think of like the first 3 seasons of Mad Men. That's what I think of when I think of the 60s. But yeah, I mean, I would go as far to say this is one of the 10 most important events in American history. What's that?
Culture.
Culturally. Yeah.
Culturally. Yeah. There's certainly way more. Kennedy's assassination, Watergate,
right.
Tragedies that we've had happen. But now I get you mean, like when we're talking about pop culture, especially when it talks about music, it's almost like one with a bullet, one with that, you don't get anything bigger than this.
In terms of non-political stuff or again, like the signing of the Civil Rights Bill, that's way more important for American history than this. But in terms of pop culture, you're right. This would be number 1, I would say. Top 5 for sure.
I mean, I was gonna say the only argument I could see is people talking about Elvis, and those people are wrong, so it doesn't really matter. And that's just me Elvis hating. It actually probably is a good argument, but it's still me just hating on Elvis. Right. This was excellent. I'm glad that we did this. This was kind of one of those things where Rob was like in the Discord, like, "Hey, this is coming up. We should do something." And I jumped on. I'm like, "Hey, how about we do this?" So, awesome. What a way to start season 3, even though I didn't realize we were doing it in seasons, which makes total sense. Let's just use years as seasons.
I'll never forget when we started season 2, A Character as a Culture. Lego goes, "Wait, we're in season 2?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's so the year." So we started the show in 22, right? Yeah, 22, 23, 24. We're in season 3. That's how I do it. Like almost like years. But whatever.
No, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
I'm down with it.
So why don't we tell the audience what we're, by the way, if you're watching the show, thank you for watching us. Please like and subscribe. We have all sorts of content on this channel. Started a new Curb Your Enthusiasm review show. It's doing very well on the channel. You want to let the audience, right? What's that? Me and Juice.
You and Juice?
Thank you, Juice, because he's the one that texted me like 2 hours before the show started. And he goes, hey, I like Curb. You want to do a review show? And I go, yeah, I'm going to finish eating dinner. I'll make an intro video and a thumbnail. And we're like 300 something views. And I'm like, shit, I got to go on Anchor and make this an audio podcast. I think this will do really well. So we're doing that. Yeah. And my friend Jimmy's going to join us at some point, hopefully sooner than later, because he's a big Curb guy. He's who got me in a Curb. But that being said, do you want to let the audience know what we're going to be doing next week? Because we're doing a show next Wednesday on Valentine's Day. For those of you that don't know, I am not married. So I technically didn't have any prior obligations. And then when you offered me this, it's like, wait, okay, I could like go out and venture into the world, or we could talk this subject, which I'd
so what we're gonna do next week is we're gonna do kind of like a traditional Valentine's Day episode, except for it's us begrudgingly single guys in this day and age. We're gonna do heartbreak slash, it's, I look at it more as like heartbreak, longing, and bittersweet, because everybody, there's so many love songs that are fantastic and wonderful, and we can name them all, and there's this stuff, but like I wanted to talk about the real good heartbreak stuff, like the really good stuff. So that's what we're going to be doing next week, as our second episode of this season, is kind of kick off I don't want to say it's anti Valentine's Day, because I don't think you and I really have any like malice towards it.
No,
we're not going to be sitting here begrudgingly like, we're single, people in love, oh, it's a Hallmark holiday, it's a commercialized thing to sell you jewelry and candy. Like that's not the spirit we're going to do. But so you and I have we have a lot of bands and wealth, and I'm going to try to like come up with some interesting stuff that isn't kind of the norm, and stuff like that. So I'm excited about our so next Wednesday, TBD on the time, probably
earlier,
right around, very much so. Like I would appreciate that, because I think that one we could go pretty long on.
Yeah, that show will probably be 2 hours. That being said, as soon as you were like doing your spiel, this like quote came above my face. Juliet, the dice was loaded from the start. That's going to be easily one of the picks for me next week, is Dire Straits' Romeo and Juliet, which is Mark Knopfler has a new album coming out. He's been plugging it on Instagram. Oh, really? Dude, straight up, like, for those of you, I know I'm like this old man, but like Mark Knopfler is one of the most underrated guitar players of all fucking time. He is just the guy watching him and Chet Atkins play guitar together is just incredible. He's got a new record coming out. And I love Mark Knopfler because he doesn't try to look like a rock star still. Like, he's gained some weight and he's bald and he just looks like everybody else. Nothing against people that are still trying to be rock stars in their 80s. That's cool. But I have so much respect for Mark Knopfler, and he's been talking about like recording this new album. And I'm sure it's not going to be Dire Straits type music. I'm sure it's like, Mark Knopfler, like folk or whatever. But dude,
so I think the idea is,
Romeo and Stuart.
I think the idea, and also because it's us and we're not going to be able to contain everything we want to talk about, this will be volume 1, which always leaves us for an opportunity to volume 2. I think the growing, I think we decided on, I think we should probably end up doing 10 each. We just go through like what the songs mean to us, and where, if it's specifically, I have some that are specifically tied to time and place, things, relationships, that sort of thing. So it'll be a fun episode. Like I said, Rob and I could talk. If I didn't have to work, we would be probably talking until about 2 a.m. Even on this subject, we would find a way to do this. So I'm excited about that. What else you got going on the channel when it comes to, because I know we've been The channel's been moving. We've been way more productive than I'm used to seeing.
Well, that's mostly because I was kind of passed out in the back of the boat. Now I'm Captain John Smith. I'm back. I got my hands on the wheel. Well, maybe not Captain John Smith because that boat went down to Chinatown.
yeah, that's not the right.
I'm a big.
But I got you. I'm following you,
dude. They're bringing the Titanic exhibit back. I'm going. It's gonna be here for like 2 months. Anyways, yeah, thank you. The channel's blooming. I started doing shorts. Those have been performing incredibly well, so it makes it worth me going to these Monday night screenings that I really have loved. Next Thursday, after this next episode of this show, Lego and I and guests Ambassador Danny and Kurt Hagens. I would say his last name wrong. By the way, sorry, Kurt. I would say your last name wrong. Are going to be doing, it's going to be our volume 1 because I know it's something like we could bring different guests on throughout the next season or 2. And I came up with like 10 immediately, but we're going to be doing volume 1 of double features. So this kind of was spurred on by the whole Barbenheimer thing. So it's kind of an open-ended question, like movies that you think would be a good double feature. So for me, a lot of them deal with similar themes. I'll give one away right now. We'll be talking about American Graffiti and The Last Picture Show that both deal same time period. Okay. Same
different perspective.
Totally different perspectives. California versus Texas.
Yeah.
Right. So
wholesome versus perversion.
What's that?
Wholesomeness versus perversion.
100%. Yeah. George Lucas and Peter Bogdanovich make very different films. But I respect the hell out of both of them. So yeah, we'll be doing double features, and I'm sure I'll have the Rocky Horror song somewhere in the intro video. Science fiction double features. But that being said, so like we're doing that, and then Joker started a new series this year. He's doing, because he's a licensed therapist, that's what he does for a living. And he's going to be focusing on like monthly mental health specials, going over different disorders from the DSM. And
first one on the channel was seasonal depression,
seasonal affectiveness disorder, SAD.
That's yeah. So Joker's awesome. What I keep touting, I love the variety and the difference that we have in our channel, that it's just fantastic. So you got Joker going on, and then him and Jimmy still doing.
Yeah. So they're doing that, and then he's doing that, and then him and Jimmy are still doing overtly opinionated once a month with the wildest titles in the world. And I got to talk to them about titles because it's not helping the algorithm to get views on those. It's like, no, I'm gonna have to start titling things. But anyway, so I say all this to say, me and Joker, Achille Carter, are also working on this like mini series. We're going to try to do like, I don't know, I'd love to do 4 of them this year, but like realistically, even if we do 2, it'll be a lot of fun. It's going to be a mashup on the channel. So I'm obviously a movie guy, movies and music, but movie guy. So we're going to talk about different films that deal with mental illnesses. So, for example, like I Am Sam with Sean Penn, Silver Linings Playbook that deals with bipolar disorder.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Obviously, that's low-hanging fruit. Same with Rain Man.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, so really excited about that. We've got some things we've been working on. Hopefully, we'll be doing the first one sometime this spring. And then outside of Characters of Culture, me and Danny are covering all the Oscars stuff. Like there's a lot, like right now, this is like the golden era for the RFN because I'm doing Curb with Juice, Oscars with Danny, Characters of Culture with Lego, this show with you. I'm doing like this mini series with Joker. And then also on top of all of this, we have so many like tier bracket shows that people have been pitching to me. We're going to do a potato episode. Like anything potato related, cheese, anything cheese related.
This is the what the show influence on our channel. This is what this is, and I'm all here for it.
Who do you think I talked to about some of these shows?
Like I know I'm all here for the weirdness, like me. But I just laughed and I'm like, oh, that's definitely a what the show idea. So So you got all that stuff. Where can everybody find your stuff?
You can find me at Rob Fishbeck on all the social medias. DM me if you want to get a hold of me. It's the easiest way to get a hold of me. I'm not very active on Twitter, but I check it enough. Mostly Instagram, Facebook once in a while. But I hear the youngsters really just don't do the Facebook. So is that true?
So weirdly enough, so this kind of ties into what I was going to do on my plug. So, if you don't know, I do the show here, but I'm also a photographer, and I've been slowly trying to get my photography business up and running, and recently exploring different avenues to start printing my stuff and selling it. So, when you bring up Facebook, like weirdly enough, depending on what audience you're trying to reach, especially with the Midwest, probably not so much our generation, but a little bit older. And then still some Facebook is still quite a bit of like the most engagement I've gotten out of because what it is I've been soliciting people. Hey, because you know me, I've got a ton of stuff that I could probably print and sell of my stuff. I just don't, I want to narrow it down and stuff. So, so yeah, Facebook has been weirdly engaging lately. So, but yeah, Twitter's not that much. So, if you want to follow my photography and also my content creation stuff at Delacommon, it is right there. trying to get right there. And so, yeah, look out for that sort of stuff. And then in March, I will be heading out east to do help my buddy Distal if you are into D&D and that sort of thing. He runs a D&D Twitch channel that I pop on every once in a while, even though I don't do anything with D&D. I pop on his talk show called Talk of the Tavern. But we'll be going out to there and we'll be doing stuff to cover PAX East in Boston. So that'll be coming up in late March. So follow at Delacommon and we'll have all the stuff, the photography, the content, all that other stuff, all that good business. Like and subscribe. That's one thing we never do. We never do like the typical YouTube of like, subscribe, ring the notification bell.
Listen, I'm down to compromise on a lot of things. There's one thing I will never do. You might see photos of me in a thumbnail doing some sort of a pose, but you will never. And listen, I mean, no offense to all of these people. I watch some of your guys' channels and I have a lot of respect for you guys. I will never do.
Yeah. That's not our bag here in the RFN.
It's not. We're the Turner Classic Movies / PBS of YouTube, and that shit don't fly here.
All right.
You guys have a great night. Take it easy.
Again, in the second half of our show, ladies and gentlemen,